Good morning and welcome to everyone, and thank you for your attendance to the first panel discussion, Living in a Material World. My name is Nick Iser and I work for Epiroc here in Australia. I'm one of our product managers responsible for our underground equipment. We have a team of Epiroc personnel here at our stand, so please visit them when you get a chance. Leading the discussion on stage, we have Max Wijasuriya from FLSmidth and Neil Maloney from Goldcorp. Max is Vice President Minerals for China, North and Southeast Asia, and Neil is Manager of Innovation and IT. The plan is to have a Q&A session for the last 10 to 15 minutes. So Max, we hear and read a lot in the media about new metal uses and hot commodities. What do you see on the horizon?
I think everyone can see that there's a big push to electric vehicles, renewable energy. I've heard the electric vehicle initiative countries are planning to increase their market share to 30% by 2030. That includes China, US, UK, France, Japan. I read somewhere else that China is also looking to build factories to provide another 120 gigawatt hours a year by 2021. So this is going to have a flow-on effect for what is being called the battery metals or the tech metals. And we're seeing it primarily in lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel, and actually copper as well. So lithium's hot right now. We see a lot of activity. Many mining companies are obviously jumping on jump in and fill that void. I think the lithium market, I've seen some analyst reports are saying the lithium market might double or even triple by 2030, and lithium prices went up by 70%. So I can go like line by line. I actually made some notes on cobalt, graphite, but I think the underlying message is there's a big push in these minerals. I'm just wondering how, from a miner's point of view, how do you see, you guys are a gold company, is there any flow-on effect from that?
Well, gold obviously has some uses. We're one of the world's largest gold mining, specific gold mining companies. We have about 2.5 million ounces a year, but one of the sort of interesting little factoids about Goldcorp is that we have a polymetallic mine in Mexico that's the world's 5th largest silver mine as well. And I think things like silver and some of the other sort of gallium and some of those sort of transitory type elements are going to be in demand. And you mentioned graphite earlier. Graphite used to be the ugliest thing in the world to even think about mining, but now it's a pretty sexy looking commodity. And the mechanisms for comminution of that and sort of the kinds of things that you guys do, purifying and refining it, is really sort of become an innovative or a source of innovation as well. So, from a miner's perspective, I think that there are some companies out there that are very innovative and very sort of forward-looking, progressive, that can jump on these elements quite quickly. Rio, you wouldn't think is someone who jumps around, but just like Stephen said, the iodorite, they've been working on that for quite some time, and they're probably going to break through on that. And there's a lot of opportunity out there. But I think what we have to sort of get away from is this conservative attitude of the typical miner, and I am one, let's be very cautious. We can't do that because we've never done it before. We've got to get away from that sort of line of thinking.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is this push towards renewables, sustainability, it's actually driving innovation. I'm personally very interested in innovation and seeing it move along. And you often hear the term, everyone wants to be first to be second. But I'm seeing a change in the language and in the activity that's happening. You just saw that presentation, how we're actually starting to collaborate. I don't think it's not just, this is creating the demand, but but actually how we're working together, how we're sharing information. You've had look how efficient mining has become if you compare to 10 years ago. Some of the numbers and costs are quite unbelievable. So I think it's not just about the battery metals, etc. I think the whole culture is changing, which I think is great.
It is. You mentioned collaboration, or implied it. We're seeing a lot of that. We go to conferences and we talk to people quite openly. We partner with some of the people who traditionally you would think of as competitors, and I'll address that in a second. But we're collaborating on innovation with people who traditionally were thought of as competitors. I think the term competition is misapplied. We were talking about this earlier. We're not competing for deposits or for metal sales. It's the very definition of a commodity that there is no competition in where it comes from and who buys it. So what we are competing for is things like the effect on bottom line, investors coming to us and seeking a return that is better than what some of our competitors are. And we're also seeing a lot of competition for talent. And that's another thing that Stephen mentioned before with the hackathons, with our initiative, Disrupt Mining, having these types of competitions where we're seeing a lot of ideas coming out of the woodwork from people who just normally would not associate themselves with mining.
Yeah, I agree. And I also find this, you're talking about competitors, I've seen a situation where you have miners facing the same problem, and I guess attacking it from different angles. And it takes, as an industry, I think mining's quite slow to actually get new technology up. I think the incubation periods, I remember at some presentations last year, it's probably sped up now, it was 5 to 10 years. And you compare it to other industries where sometimes it's as fast as months, or sometimes 1 to 2 years. It's not for shortage of smart people, but I think you'll have people competing to get an edge, and taking longer to solve a problem, and all the time you're missing out on the additional dollars or efficiency that all could make. I'm seeing that change now with all the hackathons. There's now innovation forums where people get together and talk and share information, and it's like learning how to fly. If the Wright brothers had shared information with various people, we probably would have people flying in before the 1900s. So I think, to me, that's one of the most exciting things, is that now you've actually got people collaborating more. And one case in particular is obviously our collaboration with Goldcorp. So FLSmidth collaborated with Goldcorp and on one of the big problems, and this goes to its sustainability, which is the issue with tailings. And so it came up with the thought of using waste rock and mixing it with tailings to create a dry stackable product. Now, I'm not going to steal the thunder. There's actually going to be a keynote speech from our president of minerals, Manfred Scheffer, tomorrow. So please I'll listen to that. But to me, this is where you're actually driving a sustainability result by working with a miner, whereas in the past, I think sometimes an OEM will go off and try and develop something by themselves, or a miner will go off and try and develop something by themselves, but we're now starting to work together. And I think the more we do these kind of things, the faster our industry is going to move.
Yeah, the innovation side of things, you can kind of jump on too many things all at once. You need to have sort of fundamental layers underneath all of this cool, sexy, analytical AI type stuff. And putting that together is really hard work. My focus is operational technology, so I'm at the face, getting data off machines or sending information and other communications back to equipment and people. But storing that information somewhere securely, in a clean, concise manner that can easily be attacked by these analytical engines is not simple to do. And Stephen said earlier that it's taken them quite a long time to do a lot of things. But I think the strategy that we have and the strategy that we're seeing in other companies is, get your house in order and then start doing the really cool stuff.
Yeah, I think I've spoken with some companies that have been trying to drive innovation, and I think one of the challenges is how do you measure it? How do you measure success in innovation? This is always, I think, one of the big challenges, yeah? How are your guys dealing with it? I mean, from us, it's we develop a new technology and it works and it's implemented. That's success for us. And how does a miner see innovation? Because as you see, there's so many things.
Yeah, it's tough. I think the standard sort of KPIs that people use are pretty cool because you can see improvements. The baseline is, what did we do before? Before we started raise boring, for instance, or we started having Wi-Fi everywhere underground and using fiber optic cables to communicate. So, that was the baseline. If we're now seeing an improvement in productivity, we can, in part, attribute that productivity improvement to some of the technology. But once again, it's not just cool toys that we're plugging in that make these things work. It's people as well. And when we do projects, we have a dedicated change management professional, big C, big M, who comes along and makes sure that the communication plan's in place, that the process maps are all in place so that we understand how we're doing things now and how we want to do them in the future, and that we put the appropriate training for the appropriate level of skills that's currently in place to get us to where we need to be. So the people side of innovation is, it's hard to measure, but it's also something that is probably even more important than the actual technology itself. We kind of know that the technology is going to work, but we don't know that much about people, especially when they're worried about whether or not they're going to lose their job, or there'll be fewer of them, or that they're uncomfortable with some of the technology. They've got perceptions about this stuff, right? So we have some guys, and they were men in mines, who had never owned a cell phone. And we were putting tablets in trucks, and they freaked out. But we found out that they didn't have these skills. We focused on them, gave them the skills, and they were actually the star performers. So it's not about so much the technology, it's about the integration of technology and life that I find really sort of innovative and inspiring.
So also then we're going to cover the impact of technology on material sourcing.
Yeah, so traditionally you own a mine, you make some gold or you make some lead, and you sell it to someone. And then they sell it to someone else, and they sell it to someone else, and so on. And it ends up in a refinery eventually. And that sales process can be quite circuitous, and there's a level of trust that you have to have in the person from whom you're buying the concentrate or the material. So we have invested in two companies they're being innovative through the use of blockchain technology. Blockchain is, it sounds all really cool and funky, but really all blockchain is a way to ensure trust. So that's really what's driving us, is making this sort of information friction go away in between where the material is produced from and who the ultimate user of it is. So we have two companies, as I said. One of them is probably going to annoy some of the traders in the world, we hope. The big one that starts with G. But what it does is it allows us to analyze a concentrate and ship it. We even blend it, and we can sell it immediately to an end user without intermediaries, using blockchain. And those end users who end up with the product can then analyze it and know that there's been this whole chain of custody through which nothing is changed with the product itself. The other one is something called Vault Chain, which is kind of like an ETF, where you can physically own an asset, in our case gold, and if you want to take delivery of that asset, you can, but unlike your traditional sort of bullion storage places, all of the costs of holding that asset are borne by the exchange itself, or by the company itself. So those are two of the sort of explicit uses of blockchain that we have. I think a third aspect that is still under development that we're considering is the transactional nature of work and bringing tangible items into a mine, for instance. So through warehousing and delivery of a spare part, for instance, like a final drive or a tyre, some high value item, not like an oil filter, where once again the person who's receiving it makes that transaction happen at the point where they hand it over to the next person and the end user, and we know where everything is, and that's going to drive down our working capital costs as well, because we're sort of not seeing quite as much investment in having things sitting on shelves. So, you know, I think technology really is turning the tables on the way that we traditionally do things, and I'm really enjoying it. I think that the industry is at this sort of perfect storm stage where we're seeing this fantastic amalgamation of technology and attitude, and it's really improving the bottom line of companies. You know, we're seeing tangible changes to our bottom line in productivity, in employee retention, things like that. So yeah, it's good, and it's good to sort of be talking about these things as well. You know, this isn't something that we traditionally would have done in the past, to communicate as much as we do all of these successes, and you know, we've had failures too. In a forum like this, a lot of this stuff used to be kept in the back room and no one would talk about it. So I'm glad to see that everyone's here, and it looks like it's a pretty well attended conference.
It's certainly the first I've heard of it. So.
Well, from what I've seen on blockchain, because you're right, it's about trust, right, and creating these blocks of trust. I just wonder whether it is something that could be used actually as part of this collaboration and innovation, because one of the burning issues often is IP. Mm. How do you get IP to work as an OEM, as a miner, etc., and yet still move forward? And I just wonder whether blockchain could end up being something that could help facilitate that sharing of information, keeping, you know, this is owned by someone, that's owned by another person. You could put it all together and you come up with another solution. I'm no expert on blockchain, but I just think that the possibilities are sort of endless. You know, how we have part of driving these big solutions is handling the big data, and I think something like blockchain sounds like it would be ideal to handle this kind of huge data and then keep it in blocks that it's very clear where it sort of came from. So it's kind of exciting.
Especially if you want to pull that data back, right? If you're having a non-amicable divorce from a partner, you might want to retract some of that data from your former partner. Hopefully that doesn't happen as much as it has in the past, but you know, retaining ownership of something, I think, is the key there, not just to IP, but also to assets, right? So if say there's a major M&A event where you are forced through antitrust, for instance, to divest certain things, if you can do that in a asset-based, ledger-based asset management tool, then it makes it a lot easier for whoever is stepping up to the plate to take hold of that asset next time.
Yeah, and Nick, you spoke about material sourcing. I think one of the things that is very much a trend is, you know, the fact that water is a big issue, and I don't know if that falls into that category, but for me, this trend towards going towards zero water, which is one of the driving things for the dry stack, for the eco tails and the dry stack tailings. But I think the other thing is also the fact that, as Stephen pointed out in the previous presentation, you know, we're going towards more and more complex type of ore bodies, declining ore grades, and so on. So I think the other innovation is going to be around the technology to process this equipment just shameless plug here about our rapid oxide leaching technology, which Laurie, our VP, is going to be presenting later today. But it's again about, and that's about getting better recovery from difficult and impure type minerals, right? So when you look at something like jaberite, that was in the last presentation, and trying to develop a new process for that, I think that this is another big direction for where the innovation will be. It's not just around new equipment, but around new processes as well.
Yeah, and you know, who would have thought 10, 15, 20 years ago that we'd be sitting here worrying about water? You know, it was always, well, we've got too much of it and not enough. That was the worry. But now the worry is, what are we going to do when we're coming to closure? Are we going to use less water? But are we also going to leave the water behind in a better state than when we found it? And that's kind of innovative thinking as well. And we have a lot of people in the industry to thank for, you know, giving us that sort of impetus. I mean, we have a zero water initiative as well, and you know, the EcoTails thing is part of that. But so water is one thing, and should we use less of it, and can we use it in different ways? You know, we've gone through heap leaching in the past, right? There are now lots of research initiatives going towards new leach chemicals, let's call them, that don't use cyanide, for instance, or aren't as dangerous, and can process some of these really difficult ores, or they can process tailing stamps from, or waste heaps from the past, and extract even more out of them. So those things are becoming more and more valuable too. I think we'll see in the sourcing materials sort of aspect of things, we'll see a lot more reprocessing in the future, because it's just sitting there. If we don't have to dig it up, it's sitting there. We know what it is, we know where it is. We just haven't been able to process it in the past. So, you know, I think there's a lot of value in that too.
Great.
So you might have had a bit more on the reuse and recycling of metals.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at what Apple's doing, right? Apple is you know, wanting to recycle all of its metals now.
Get tantalum from their phones, right? Yeah.
And you know, I think Stephen said earlier, or it might have been Theo, was talking about the entrance of new players in the mining field. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw, you know, a Walmart, for instance, getting into mining in some way, or reprocessing for that matter. But you know, we shouldn't just consider that the miners are the miners and that's it, we're done. I think we should also consider the possibility that in the future there's going to be some non-traditional companies involved in mining, because they see a lot of opportunity. You know, we're not an industry that has phenomenally quick uptake of technology or innovation. Other people can leverage that who are, you know, the gaffers, as Stephen said.
But it's a circular economy, right? So if you look at that whole mining process from exploration all the way through, there's little circles within it. There's some lovely diagrams that show the stuff that is starting to happen. So recycling clearly is one of them. Reuse, refurbishing, because this all keeps the cost down. And as we become a world that is having less and less of things, people are starting to look much more in all these areas. So yeah, absolutely. I think reuse and how we do things more efficiently, it all becomes part of it. And that's where the water question comes in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up on a farm in North Queensland, and you know, doing things efficiently is sort of built into my sort of core values. So this is why, you know, productivity improvements and reusing and recycling really is quite meaningful to me and to my team. And you know, we have a really good group of people who also latch onto this whole concept of you know, being as efficient as you possibly can with what you've got. And you know, that's really important, is having these people who believe, who will allow you to fail occasionally, and who trust the fact that what you're doing is something that is going to ultimately improve not just the bottom line for the shareholder, but also the broader community as well.
Anything else
No.
you'd like? So obviously I think the questions are going to be better coming from the floor than from me. So I think if we open up, I don't know if a microphone travels around or... Yes.
Tom Corley from Resolution Systems. Just curious, we're seeing a bit of a trend at the moment of some companies trying to do a lot of technology internally, and a bit of a mix between sourcing in technology or trying to develop technology internally. I don't know what Goldcorp's doing, but what's your view on what's happening in that space and the logic of either or?
So the question was about how innovation is happening internally and whether or not there's partnering going on. I think I paraphrase that appropriately. Yes, so we're doing a lot of internal projects. We gather a lot of those internal projects from things similar to hackathons. A lot of the reasoning behind why we do specific projects comes down to personalities and bandwidth as well. I would love to be doing 100 projects, but I've got to sleep sometime. However, we can and we do outsource a lot of the sort of grunt work and some of the heavy lifting work to partners as well. So we have, for instance, a collaboration effort going on with IBM for Watson, using their artificial intelligence engine, Watson. We do these kinds of projects all over the place, and we sort of manage the projects and come up with some of the ideas and then farm out some of the work to people. We also have people coming to us with ideas, asking us to help them to do things. So, the FLSmidth one was a classic, the Eco Tales. So, we're getting a lot of collaboration both internally and externally, and once again, I keep beating this horse, but it's about people doing non-traditional discussions and discussing things that back in the past would have been like trade secrets. We're a little bit more open with that now, because what it's coming down to is the people and not the actual underlying sort of technology, and this is what I was alluding to before when I was talking about competing for talent is really going to be where the future resides. So does that answer your question?
It does. It just seems a little, I'm not sure how, the sense of developing something internally. I mean, you could build your own car from scratch for $5 million, or you could just buy a perfectly good C-Class for 90 grand and it would work a lot better. So the idea of companies building these systems internally, is that occurring in part because A, that's what people want to do and it's possibly not entirely rational, or is it because the supply industry really isn't offering anything really compelling yet?
So I have this sort of mantra that I subscribe to, and it is that if something's 80% of the way there, and I don't know how you measure that, I'm just making that up as I go along, but if something's 80% of the way there, it's probably good enough. We can do the rest of the 20%. So for instance, if there is a product that's out on the market that does most of what we want it to do, we can work with the vendor and perhaps with some consultants or internally with teams who have subject matter experts that can go the rest of the way and make it into what we wanted. So it's kind of hybridizing things that are out there.
If you go back, 3 to 5 years, I think what you'd see is that the mining companies would be actually trying to, almost mirror that. They'd create, innovation groups that were mirroring what OEMs were doing. And I think that's a double up. And I think that's one of the big changes. You're actually starting to collaborate. For me, the hackathon type events have been real eye-openers, because it's exactly what was mentioned earlier. You get approaches that are completely, that you just absolutely would not even imagine, and they come with some great solutions. I saw a great one last year on a safety issue for a mine site, and these are propeller heads that go in a room, and they come up with an idea that's completely off the wall, but it actually works. And I think that's where the advantage is. That's the big change now, and I think everyone's recognizing that, hey, we're not the only owners of the solution. I think we actually get better when we're collaborating, etc. And I think that's a big change.
Thank you. There's a microphone coming. I don't know how loud you'll... Excuse me.
Thank you. Elliot Khan, BHP. I'm just interested in, I guess, how to increase collaboration and innovation. I guess in the big miners, we're all trying to develop our own little systems. We're all trying to do the same things at slightly different times and slightly different stages. So it's sort of following on from the previous question. But do we need some sort of forum, or how can we increase collaboration with innovation that specifically affects safety? Because a lot of the innovation ideas that we heard about this morning and that we're all working on do have an impact on safety, some more profoundly than others. But should we not be sharing these and sort of co-developing these to increase the rate of innovation? Because otherwise we seem to just move slower and slower.
Yeah, so there are some standards bodies that are out there for that you can use as a forum. So the Global Mining Standards Group would be one of them. But things like this is really probably the most beneficial, and you've got all of these people in this room or in this building all at the same time. We can't all speak to each other all at once, but you'll probably hit 10 people here, and one or two of those will become good networking contacts with whom you can share things. So I think it'll take a little more while to evolve before we're all sort of talking openly and not sitting on the other side of the bar from each other looking sideways. These types of forums, the other conventions like CIM and PDAC and things like that, and going out and seeing different things as well. So one of the reasons that I'm based in Vancouver, but one of the reasons that I'm here is to see some innovations that have happened in Australia that we're not quite sort of up to speed with yet in Canada. So we're actually visiting one of your operations, but that wouldn't have been possible maybe even 5 years ago. So because we're sort of seeing a different mindset coming into a certain management level now, where people are a bit more willing to be open and a bit more understanding of the differences between companies, I think things are changing and the industry is going to improve as a result.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, when they started doing